We're surrounded by stories all the time, right? In books, on the news, from our friends. But have you ever stopped to think about what happens when we only hear one version of a story about a person or a country over and over and over again? Well, that's what we're digging into today, the incredible power and the real danger of the single story. So let's start with this description. All my characters were white and blue-eyed, they played in the snow, they ate apples. I mean, it sounds like a pretty standard kids book, doesn't it? Nothing too out of the ordinary there. But here's the twist. What if I told you the kid who wrote this had never, ever seen snow? That she lived where mangoes grew everywhere, not apples, and was surrounded by people who looked absolutely nothing like the characters she was dreaming up? That's the real puzzle, isn't it? Why would her imagination be so completely disconnected from her own life? Well, the person who wrote those words is the brilliant Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie. She's kind of our guide through this whole idea. And yes, she was describing her own first attempts at writing when she was just a little girl living in Nigeria. And right there, that's the heart of the issue. See, Adichie was a huge reader from a young age, but every single book she could get her hands on was British or American. So her idea of what a book even was, what characters were supposed to look and act like, was totally shaped by these foreign stories. The books on her shelf had created a single story about literature itself. But then, everything changed. She discovered African authors, writers like the legendary Chinua Achebe, and for her, this was a total game changer. It was this powerful revelation that people who looked like her, who lived lives like hers, could actually exist in books. It completely shattered that single story, and as she puts it, it saved her. Okay, the danger of one narrative, how stereotypes are built and reinforced. So you see how this personal experience of her starts to blow up into this massive global issue. Because this isn't really just about books, is it? It's about how we build our deepest, most stubborn stereotypes about entire groups of people. And then the tables completely turned. When Adichie came to the United States for college, she ran headfirst into another single story. This time about her. She'd escaped the single story of what books could be, only to discover that her entire continent was trapped inside one. Her new American roommate had a very, very specific idea of what Africa was all about. So what was that story? Well, it was a single story of catastrophe, of beautiful landscapes filled with starving people, of senseless wars, and pity. Her roommate was genuinely shocked to find out Adichie spoke English so well, or that she listened to Mariah Carey. The unbelievable complexity and diversity of 54 different countries was just flattened into one simple, tragic narrative. Now, here's where she gets really honest. Because Adichie is the first to admit she's not immune to this. After years and years of hearing negative coverage in the US, she visited Mexico, and she was totally taken aback to see people just living their lives, working, laughing, going about their day. She realized, with a real sense of shame, that she had bought into the single story of Mexicans as only one thing, the abject immigrant. And this is her formula for how it happens. She says, that is how to create a single story. Show a people as one thing, as only one thing, over and over again, and that is what they become. The problem isn't that stereotypes are untrue, she explains. It's that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Okay, so this brings us to the big question, right? If we know this dangerous oversimplification is the problem, how do we actually fight back against it? What's the antidote here? The comparative politics solution, a formal way to see the whole picture. Well, it turns out there's a whole field of study dedicated to doing exactly that. It's called comparative politics, and you can think of it as a structured, formal way to break down these single stories about countries and how they're run. So, what is it really? Well, at its core, comparative politics is all about studying how different countries actually work. It's not about trying to find the one best way to do things. Instead, it's about looking at all these different systems side by side to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, and why they change over time. And this connects perfectly to what Achichi was saying. Remember, she said you can't really understand a place or a person without engaging with all of their stories. Well, that's exactly what comparative politics tries to do. It gathers all the stories, all the data, all the history, to build a much richer, more complete picture. And listen to the kind of questions this field tackles.
We're talking about the really big stuff, like how do democracies even get started and how do they collapse? Why do some governments stick around for centuries while others fall apart? Can democracy actually work everywhere? And what can governments do to pull people out of poverty? These are huge, fascinating questions. Section 3, Thinking like a Political Scientist, with 2 crucial tools for clear analysis. So how do the people who study this for a living avoid falling into the very same single-story traps? Well, they use some specific mental tools to keep their analysis sharp and clear. Let's look at 2 of the most important ones.
First up is the huge difference between causation and correlation. This is so important. Causation means that A directly causes B to happen, a real direct link. Correlation, on the other hand, just means that A and B seem to be connected somehow. They move together, but one isn't necessarily causing the other. Mixing these 2 up is probably the fastest way to get things wrong. Here's a classic example to make it stick. In the summer, ice cream sales go way up. At the same time, the number of forest fires also goes up, so they're correlated. But does buying a pint of ice cream cause a forest fire? Of course not. There's a third factor, hot, dry weather, that causes both. Political scientists are always on the hunt for that hidden third factor. The second big tool is knowing the difference between what is and what you think should be. An empirical statement is a provable fact. It can be verified with data. Mexico has a presidential system of government. That's empirical. But a normative statement is a value judgment. It's an opinion. The United Kingdom should eliminate the monarchy. A good, clear analysis always starts with the empirical facts before ever jumping to normative conclusions. Okay, rejecting the single story. Why this all matters. So we've talked about the problem, the single story, and we have some tools to fight it. Let's bring it all home and talk about why this is one of the most important things we can actually do.
This is the bottom line right here. Adichie says the consequence of the single story is this. It robs people of dignity. It makes our recognition of our equal humanity difficult. It robs people of dignity. When we boil down a person or an entire country to one simple narrative, that's what's at stake. We make it harder to see them as fully human, as complex and messy as we are. Because, think about it, the single story is almost always about how they are different from us. It builds walls. It gets rid of all the nuance. It finds out one point of difference and blows it up so big that it completely blocks out all the shared human experiences that actually connect us.
But, and this is the hopeful part, Adichie says that when we choose to reject that easy single story, when we go out and look for multiple perspectives and embrace complexity, we don't just get smarter, we actually regain something essential. We start to see the world and all the people in it more fully. We restore what she calls a kind of paradise, a paradise of endless, fascinating stories. So as we wrap this up, I want to leave you with a question to chew on. Think about a place or a group of people, maybe even a political idea, that you realize you only have one simple story for. What single story will you challenge today?